on the free speech issue, while it's very important to me, and we've done a lot of lobbying on it over the years, it wasn't something that came up in my qualitative polling. So what that says to me is that out of roughly 600 or 700 people, none of them, conservative or otherwise, saw that as a top of mind issue. It also doesn't give you a reason for, if you're a voter, differentiating between Dutton and Albanese, because they're both as bad as each other. So you won't make your decision on that, but you know where Albanese stood on the Voice, and you know where Dutton stood on the Voice. And if you're a conservative voter, particularly living in a regional area, that reassures you about where Dutton's heart is.
Is there any way of avoiding this mess, do you think, based on the research that you've done?
Yeah. Either Labor can get a majority in its own right, which means it needs to hold every seat that it currently holds, or Peter Dutton needs to pick up, I think it's 17 or 18 seats. Now, that's large, but not unprecedented. It was a similar target for David Crisafulli in the last Queensland election, out of a parliament with 93, which is much smaller than the federal parliament. So it's possible that he could do that. If he's going to do that, then he's going to have to win back both the Green seats in Brisbane, and he's going to have to take a swag of those working class Labor seats around the edges of Sydney and North and South Coast, particularly in coal mining and steel manufacturing areas. If he can do that, he can conceivably scrape through to a majority, but it's a hard ask.
To do that in qualitative terms, is he going to have to focus on very sort of grassroots, traditional Australian values of the outer suburbs and the and in the country and regional centres, or is he and just forget about the inner city, pretty much?
Well, I think the same strategy can serve him well in the inner city as it does in the regions. I think he's got to lay down I think of it in musical terms, he's got to lay down a strong beat, and that's the cultural stuff. And I think he's done pretty well on that. He opposed the Voice eventually, and I think that was clever politics the way he did that, because he had to bring a significant, potentially dissident part of the Liberal Party with him. So he came to that gradually, but he managed that really well. That puts him in a good position. If he can talk about immigration, again, that's more a cultural issue. That's more that sort of beat. And he's been talking about anti-Semitism, which again is a cultural issue, laying down a beat.
The Other Side with Damien Coorey is Australia's best independent news commentary show, bringing you up to speed and diving deep on the issues that matter most in around an hour, with a new episode dropping every second Friday. As we enter our 5th year, we're going to be bringing you more content via our YouTube and X channels at Other Side Oz with The Other Side Unplugged. Damien will drop comments on the news whenever something important happens, and in-depth interviews with people who have real insight and value to add. More content when it matters, but only when it matters, so you don't miss a thing. Subscribe now to our YouTube channel at Other Side Oz by clicking the button and the bell below the picture frame, and follow us on X now at Other Side Oz. That's AUS at Other Side Oz. It's free. This is The Other Side.
We got a lot of reaction to the MAD laws last year, a lot of concern in the community. I don't know how quantitative that was, how many people were angry, but the qualitative depth of anger was massive. And we're now seeing this hate speech laws going through without any opposition from the Liberal national parties. They've gone along with it. These laws are censorious. So they're a problem for a lot of people as well. And I'm seeing the same sort of qualitative anger out there among conservative voters on that issue. Who are the people in the party who are moderate, and should they be put into line? I mean, are we really sort of, running a risk of loss here if we don't get the moderates, I guess, more in line with traditional Liberal Party values, stated values of the party?
On the free speech issue, while it's very important to me, and we've done a lot of lobbying on it over the years, it wasn't something that came up in my qualitative polling. So what that says to me is that out of roughly 600 or 700 people, none of them, conservative or otherwise, saw that as a top of mind issue. Cost of living was a top of mind issue. Immigration, the economy, climate change, they were depending where you were coming from. But the mad laws, I don't. I mean, I could go and go back in and do a word count in the data, but it didn't come up.
It doesn't surprise me, actually, because I think that really with those laws, we're talking about something that, as I said, concerns a lot of people, concerns a minority of people on the right very deeply. The people who are concerned about liberty and freedom of expression, concerned about government overreach. But I've often felt that the average Australian in their day-to-day would happily have their freedom of speech taken away gradually, and probably like a boiling frog wouldn't notice, and aren't really going to get up in arms about that sort of thing as much as cost of living.
I think, Damien, those laws sort of got sneaked through, so most people didn't even notice. There was, when the original MAD legislation was withdrawn, but that was withdrawn and everyone thinks, okay, we've had a win, and then this happens. But there wasn't the sustained campaigning about it.
No.
It doesn't. It also doesn't give you a reason for, if you're a voter, differentiating between Dutton and Albanese, because they're both as bad as each other. So you won't make your decision on that, but you know where Albanese stood on the Voice, and you know where Dutton stood on the Voice. And if you're a Conservative voter, particularly living in a regional area, that reassures you about where Dutton's heart is. So that's the sort of the beat that you lay down, but then you've got the tune, and the tune should be, I'd suggest, mostly cost of living. And in so much as cost of living is about electricity prices, it should be about Labor's botched energy transition.
Energy is the greatest input cost.
Yeah, and in terms of housing prices, I think the easiest thing to talk about there is immigration, where we're putting a Tasmania every year, a fresh Tasmania load of people every year into the country. That's one of the pressures that's forcing houses up. And it's something the government could fix tomorrow, and it is a federal government responsibility. So if I were Peter Dutton, there's two areas that I'd be targeting in my policy during the election campaign. So you've got the reassurance underneath of this is where I am culturally, and then you've got I'm talking to the issues that really concern you, and here's a solution that'll work.
Anything in your polling that sort of indicated a desire among conservative or nationalistic voters to vote away from the coalition and out of frustration that, because we also see a lot of that in our, obviously this show being sort of a centre-right show, we do get a lot of feedback in that direction that, people are sick of the Liberal Party and they want a more strong libertarian or conservative voice, and they're going to vote for minor parties and give their preferences to the LNP. But in the first instance, they're going to vote for the minor parties. Was there any of that coming through? And should the Liberal National Party even be concerned about that, I suppose, given that the preferences will flow to them anyway?
Well, they should be concerned about it because they don't necessarily flow through. One of the when you look at the vote, the Greens, 85, maybe even 90% preference Labor. But when it comes to One Nation and United Australia Party and Libertarians, etc., it's not 80, 90%, it might be 60%. It seems to be hardening up over time, but it is one of the issues. So the Liberal Party shouldn't be, negligent about those voters. It should be talking to them. But they do appear to be more likely these days to come across to the Liberal Party or the National Party than they were. So it's less of a problem.
Should people who are thinking of voting for minor parties be very careful where they put their preferences, because it could be a situation now where if they fail to put their preferences in the right place, we could wind up with a terrible situation of a Labor-Green coalition government, or a Labor-Teal some sort of coalition between Labor and the Teals, or agreement between Labor and the Teals to form government, which would be a very serious outcome for the country.
Yeah, and the other sort of voting motivation you find sometimes is that people want to punish the party that they actually would favour in government. So I'm actually talking to you from London at the moment, and you had an example of that in the last British election, where people who are normally Tory voters were so disgusted at the Tory party that they voted for either Remain or Lib Dems or even Labor because they wanted the Tories to get a message. Now, I don't think that's an issue in Australia because Peter Dutton isn't in the position where he's disappointed those people. But, sometimes people get a single issue burr under their saddle and they decide to do the punishment thing. So that can actually work against them if they don't think the consequences through.
The other side doesn't get more than $1 billion of taxpayers' money to bring you news from a centre-right perspective like the ABC does to bring you news from a left-wing perspective. In fact, we don't get a red cent from the government. We need voluntary donors and supporters like you to keep going and growing. And we hate asking for charity, so we've done a deal with what we think is the world's best VPN, virtual private network service. It'll keep you and your family truly safe without slowing down your internet speeds, and you can watch Netflix or other streaming services using your regular accounts with them as if you're viewing from any country in the world. And you can sign up for less than $3 a month and get a whopping 83% off the normal price. Just go to piavpn.com/otherside to sign up and get more info. That's piavpn.com/otherside.
The Other Side with Damien Coorey is Australia's best independent news commentary show. As we enter our 5th year, we're going to be bringing you more content via our YouTube and X channels at Other Side Oz with The Other Side Unplugged. More content when it matters, but only when it matters, so you don't miss a thing. Subscribe now to our YouTube channel at Other Side Oz by clicking the button and the bell below the picture frame, and follow us on X now at Other Side Oz. That's AUS at Other Side Oz. It's free. This is The Other Side. Stay in touch. Check out our independent website at othersidetv.com.au. You can sign up for free there too, or join the exclusive side and help support our show for less than $5 a month.